Ever sit down to write a cue and feel like your brain's been replaced by a dial-up modem? Kids, ask your parents about that one. Or maybe you've got a DAW open, the coffee's hot, you set aside time, and you've even got a few patches loaded up, but nothing. Or worse, what if you're halfway through a cue and it suddenly feels like IKEA furniture with no instructions, 3 extra pieces, and a stubbornly unhelpful Allen wrench? Well, chances are it's not a talent problem, but a process problem. Because when you don't know where you are in the creative process, everything just feels harder than it has to. That's why today we're walking through the 4 C's of success: collect, collaborate, create, and correct. 4 clear phases that can help you get out of your head and back into the cue. Think of it like creative GPS, except instead of recalculating, it just keeps you from getting lost either in loop land or drowning in plug-in options. So if your cue's been stuck in neutral or you've been polishing a mix that isn't even finished yet, don't go anywhere, because this might just be the process you didn't even know you needed. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Kropf, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Cues podcast, where each week we are talking about all things production and library music. So whether you're just starting out or maybe you're already getting placements on TV, I promise you, you are in the right place. As always, today's episode is made possible thanks to the generous support of our member subscribers at 52 Cues, who are composers just like you, working to write better cues and find success in the sync music industry. And 52 Cues is there to help make that happen with live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, hundreds of hours of video archives, working with real libraries, and a ton more. So if you're curious about joining us, you can head over to 52cues.com, or you can stick around because I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later in today's episode. Speaking of today's episode, we are looking at a creative framework that can help you stay on track and finish stronger, called the 4 C's: collect, collaborate, create, and correct. Plus, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on a psychedelic rock cue from 52 Cues member Fraser Macdermid. But first, what have I been working on lately? Well, like I said, last week, I was kind of in between briefs. I have since had a couple of briefs that have come my way. Spoiler warning, back to dramedy. I love me some dramedy, and so we're going to be doing some more hip-hop stuff, some more straight-ahead dramedy, and so be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, I was able to put together a light investigation tension cue, and I deliberately wanted to get back into some sounds that maybe I haven't used in a while, and just looked through some of the contact instruments that I got with Complete that honestly I pulled up once and then promptly forgot about. It's an embarrassment of riches when you get Complete. There are so many options, and Native Instruments has just keep piling on, right? And so there were some sounds that I hadn't even, I don't even know if I've opened up these instruments before. So I thought I would deliberately go in and find some sounds that I haven't used before and use these in a cue. This is called Perjury Rigged. Pun on jury rigged and perjury and perjury. Anyway, Perjury Rigged. It's a light tension cue. So that was Perjury Rigged. Yeah, it really was cool going into the complete library and finding things that I haven't used before and revisiting some older sounds that used to be an absolute staple of my sound, whether it's the metal drum from Stock Logic or the boom whackers from the Imogen Heap's box of tricks. I used to use those all the time, but the deeper I got into using other sounds, then they kind of fell out of favor for no real reason. It's just I started using other things. And so it was a reminder to sometimes to just go back to the classics, the things that worked for you. For you family and friends folks, be sure to tune in over in the community because I'm going to do a complete breakdown of this, including the sounds I used, some of those dusted off contact instruments, some of the new instruments I haven't used, and some more serum patches that I created from scratch. All right. So for today's topic, I want to walk through, this is something that I recently heard on the Mind Your Business podcast with James Wedmore that he called the 4 C's of success, which are collect, collaborate, create, and correct. Now, even though James Wedmore is a business coach and his podcast is about entrepreneurship and all this, the 4 C's isn't really like a corporate slogan or some kind of get-rich system. I have found it to be a super simple way to kind of frame what we as production music composers do. It's pretty much whether we realize it or not. We are doing this process because, you know, when you break down the process of writing and delivering a cue, especially in production music, these 4 stages come up every single time. So let's take a look at each one, starting with the first C, collect. This is the phase that comes before you ever open your DAW, before you ever write a single note, before you start dragging patches into Logic or maybe setting up a new session. You know, collect is about gathering. And I think in the Music Interval Theory Academy, I think they actually call it this process, gathering. And I'm not necessarily talking about just sample or loops, even though that's completely part of it. I'm also talking about kind of gathering your ideas. They could be references, gathering emotional targets and genre intentions, you know. It's about getting your head into the world of the cue before you ever start trying to build it. For me, that does often look like studying reference tracks. You know, if I know that I'm writing a reality tension cue for a crime documentary, then I'll pull up references and really dig into them. I'll pull up library references, I'll pull up clips from shows, similar shows, maybe even the same show. And I'll ask myself questions like, what's the structure? What kind of instrumentation is being used? How is this composer building energy? How are the transitions being handled? And then I'll go crate diving into my own library. Maybe I'll look at old patches or find some old cues, maybe some unfinished sessions, or just something that never got any love 6 months ago. Not to just wholesale repurpose it, but to spark something. Sometimes I'm also collecting or gathering emotionally. I'll literally just kind of sit back, ask myself, what do I want this cue to feel like? What is its emotional goal? Because the more clarity I have on this emotional goal, then the easier I have found the writing process becomes. If we just start to write, just to write without a clear direction that comes from collecting and gathering ourselves, then it feels aimless. Collecting can also mean reading the brief. And I mean really reading it, maybe jotting down descriptive words that stand out, that get used over and over. If you see words like suspenseful, quirky, hopeful, driving, melancholy, this is emotional, metadata that you can start building around. and figuring out and listening to references that connects the musical dots between the emotional word and how that is expressed musically. I mean, there's a reason I did a whole episode on interpreting briefs, and we'll put a link to that and you can check that out. It's called Read the Bleeping Brief. But in the end, the collect phase kind of sets the tone for everything else that comes after. And I have found that when I don't take the time to collect myself, to gather references, gather inspiration, man, I really feel it. That's when I will sit down at the keyboard and stare at the blank screen and just kind of poke around, kind of hoping inspiration just kind of shows up. But when I'm done the collecting part, I know where I'm headed because I've got that compass. I've got some direction. And no, you're not necessarily going to start posting Instagram posts of reels of yourself, kind of organizing folders and bookmarking reference tracks and patches and doing analysis. I don't know who's looking for that necessarily in an Instagram account, but it's absolutely essential because without this phase, without the collection process, the rest just gets a whole lot harder and you are kind of flying blind. Okay, so once you've collected what you need, whether it's ideas or references or emotional goals, then we move on to our second C, which is collaborate. Now, collaboration, might not seem like an automatic step, especially if you're like me, you're more of a solo composer. And you might be thinking, Dave, man, I work alone. It's just kind of me in my studio. I don't really know anybody. I'm not in a community of people. And yeah, I totally get that. Although if you're watching this right now, I promise you, you're not alone. But while I'll do most of my writing solo, this is something I'm actively working on. I mean, this is my year of collaboration, and that was super deliberate to get me out of my solo mindset. It doesn't just mean co-writing. It doesn't just mean working with another composer. It also means connecting. It means being in conversation with the people around your cue, whether it is, yes, a co-writer, or maybe a publisher, or maybe the community, or it could be the relationship with the brief itself. It means letting some other voices into the process. And sometimes that's literal. Maybe you're teaming up with somebody who's super great at guitar while you handle the drums. Maybe you have a collaborator who mixes or handles your metadata. Other times, it might be more subtle. You might drop your cue into the 52 Cues community and get some feedback, or maybe share your cue with a spouse or a partner or a composer friend that you have, and they will tell you, I'm not really feeling this B section. Well, that's collaboration too. And there is a side effect to all of this. The more collaborative you are, the less precious your cue becomes, and you start to see your cues as products, as commodities, which might feel a little icky, but at the end of the day, your cues are something that's meant to be used and shaped and edited and refined. What they're not necessarily are sacred pieces of your soul that no one's allowed to touch. And in the production music space, that mindset is absolutely mission critical because we are writing to briefs. We are working with publishers and libraries. I mean, we're not writing music just for ourselves. We're writing for editors, for producers, for music supervisors. So even, if we're not technically co-writing, we're still collaborating. You're collaborating with a system. You're responding to a need, and you're writing something that has a job to do. And most of the time, the thing that you are writing is allowing somebody else to do their job. And the more you embrace this concept, then I believe the more successful your cues will be. Now again, don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean you have to say yes to absolutely every suggestion or bend over backwards to try to kind of please everybody. And there is a time where I feel you can kind of dig your artistic heels in. But It just means that you're open and flexible and that you're willing to try out a suggestion if it makes the cue stronger, because everybody wants the same thing. Anytime I'm getting feedback from a publisher, we both want the same thing. We both want this piece of music to get on television. And while collaboration can take a lot of different forms, the goal is the same. We want to refine our vision. We want a little bit of help from the outside, because at the end of the day, no cue exists in a vacuum all by itself. And the sooner we let go of this kind of lone genius mindset, or that what I'm making is high art that cannot be touched, then the better our cues and our careers will be. So, after you've spent some time, collecting your ideas, building your references, and maybe getting a little outside perspective or from collaborators or publishers, then it's time for our third C, create. And this is the part that we usually think about when we think about doing the work, doing the production. This is where you actually open up the DAW and you start putting the cues together, set the tempo, pull a patch up, start sketching ideas. And it's where all of that preparation that we've been spending time with begins to take form. Now, that might mean, writing a chord progression. It might be playing out some drums. It might be shaping a synth sound, or starting to kind of build out your form. Here's the A section. Here's the B section. Here's an edit point. Here's a button. But the important thing here is that you're actually making something. You're transitioning out of the idea space and into the sound space. And look, this can often be the most creatively rewarding part of the process, but it could also be the most mentally challenging, because this is where self-doubt can kind of start to creep in. This is where perfectionism tries to wrangle the wheel out of your hands, and you start maybe comparing what you're making to the cues you've just referenced, the cues that you hear on TV, and suddenly your fun little idea just doesn't sound good enough anymore. What sounded fantastic an hour or 2 hours ago now doesn't feel like it holds up. Or maybe you're out of creative gas. This is kind of like in loop territory, where you're just fiddling with the same 8 bars, or you've just listened to the one song section over and over, and nothing is kind of getting past that point. So, what I really want to say about this phase is it's not about perfection. It's much more about momentum and about giving yourself permission to explore, to follow threads that might take you, out of where you wanted to go, and not get mired in it having to be just right. And we've talked about that on the podcast, how often if I'm auditioning patches, I will find a sound which is like 75 to 80% of the way there. And even though at the time I might not think, this is the perfect patch, it's 80% of the way there. I'm going to use it. And most of the time, it ends up working great by the time the cue is done. And we don't even want to get into whether or not our mix is perfect, or whether a certain voicing is just maybe a little more awkward. It's not working. The voice leading isn't working. We're not even going to worry if we're using the same drum patch or maybe a drum loop that we used just last week. The idea is to just keep going. Because at the end of the day, you can't fix a cue that doesn't exist. You can't polish something that never made it across the finish line. And when I remind myself about this part, that it's about building something, not everything perfectly, it really does free me up to enjoy the process altogether. Okay? And I'm not saying you should turn off your inner critic completely, but I do think you have to quiet it down long enough to let your ideas have an opportunity to get out of your head and into the DAWs. I mean, some days the ideas are going to flow. Other days, you're going to have to kind of coax them out one by one. But either way, the work gets done here. And this is where the cue becomes real. So be sure to stay loose, stay curious, but most of all, stay moving. We're kind of like sharks. Don't sharks have to keep moving in order to breathe? Because, the creation process, it's not the end of the road. It's the bridge to that final step, which is correct. So after you've collected, collaborated, and created, we arrive to that final C. Okay. And this right here, correction, this is where I think a lot of cues fall short. Not because the ideas weren't good, not because, the production itself maybe was bad. It's because maybe we didn't take time to kind of take a step back, listen with fresh ears, and make whatever adjustments need to be made. Okay, now I want to be clear. Correction doesn't mean just fix all your mistakes in some kind of shame-based perfectionist kind of way. It's about refinement. It's about kind of trying to elevate your cue, kind of zooming out and asking yourself, is this cue doing its job? Does it deliver on the emotional goal that you set out to accomplish? Does it follow the brief? Does it build energy in the right place? Does it have the proper form? Is it what the library is looking for? Is the mix clean? Is it muddy? Is it too sibilant? Is it too sharp? Is there something masking something else? This part of the process is where you move from creative mode into editorial or analytical mode. This is where I will bounce my cue down, usually throw it into a SoundCloud playlist, but I'll go for a drive. I will listen to the cue. I will put it kind of on repeat, or maybe I'll listen to something else and come back and listen to it in headphones or in the studio with a fresh perspective. And this is where I will pay attention to the technical details and I think through how I would fix them as I work towards deliverables. Because we're not thinking necessarily creatively. This is that other side of the brain, the analytical, the left hemisphere of the brain. Because, no matter how inspired your ideas are, if the final files, what you're delivering to the library, if it's a mess, the cue's probably not going to get placed. And I kind of say that from experience. I've rushed through this final step before. I've submitted cues too early because I was just tired or maybe lazy, or I just wanted it to get done, or maybe I was just out of time and I hadn't budgeted enough time to really work through this phase properly. And those are almost always the cues that will either get returned or maybe with revision suggestions, or maybe they just disappear right into the dark corners of the catalog and they never see the light of day. I have gotten error. One cue comes to mind specifically that I got error with, that I rushed through this process. I didn't do my normal mixing process and all of that. And it got error, and I was honestly kind of embarrassed. I knew that I rushed through this process. But I find when I slow down and really embrace correction, when I sit down and listen to things critically, I clean things up, give a cue a final polish, that's where I feel super confident about hitting that submit button. Sometimes corrections mean going back and reworking a section that isn't working at all, kind of back to formula. Maybe you are stepping back into the creative phase. Sometimes it means, removing things, not adding things, but just simply muting some things out. And it means another round of revisions, getting another round of feedback from your publisher or maybe folks in the community, because, we don't hear everything that needs fixing the first time, and we might not even hear it until somebody will point it out. But none of this is going to happen if we don't leave time to correct. If we treat create as the finish line, then we miss out on this part of the process. Kind of like if we skip over the collection aspect. and we just immediately start creating, then we're shortchanging the process and ultimately making much more work for ourselves down the line. So take the extra time. It might even be an extra day, at least an extra 5 minutes. Do that second pass, get the mix notes, check the metadata more than once, check for spelling, because correction is what's going to elevate your cue and add a professional quality. And it's this attention to detail that I find really sets the amateur from the professional. It's that final piece that brings all of the other C's together and tells the library that you have what it takes to swim in this ocean professionally, right? As long as we keep moving, because we're sharks, and I think that's how sharks breathe. So what does all this mean? No, the reason I'm spending time talking about this today is because I think a lot of creative frustration comes from not really knowing where we are in the process, maybe sometimes skipping over things that we're creating before we're collecting, or we're trying to put things in the wrong order, or maybe we don't even give enough time for part of the process. It's kind of like building a sandwich by trying to pull each ingredient out of the fridge one at a time, or I'm going to take out one piece of bread from the bag, and then I'm going to set the bag aside, and then I'm going to go grab a piece of cheese, and I need a second piece of bread. So it's putting things all out of order, And so if we skip these phases, whether it's collect, collaborate, create, or correct, then, we might sit back and wonder kind of why things are off, why isn't it really gelled, And so we shouldn't think of any of these phases kind of as an afterthought. We shouldn't rush through one phase. We should give each one of these 4 stages: collect, collaborate, create, and correct, using it, giving it space and using it as a roadmap. Again, not a rigid GPS system that's going to bark at you if you turn the wrong way. More like kind of like one of those paper maps, that your dad kept in the glove box. I'm assuming I could never get those things folded properly again. And even to this day, if I ever bring out a map, or it could be IKEA instructions, I just can't refold those again. What I'm trying to say is that the creative process isn't always super clean and clear. And sometimes these steps do blur together. You might be halfway through correction and realize, oh man, I didn't finish my collecting phase, and that's fine. You can just take a step back. You can refill your creative pantry and then try it again. Again, it's not about perfection. It's about knowing what stage you're in, so you can end up making a cue that you're proud of, So the process works because it gives you momentum. It gives you a rhythm to your process. It gives you structure in making your cue without necessarily boxing you in. And when you follow it, I think you're going to find that you write faster, clearer, and with more intentionality, and it's much more sustainable. So next time you're feeling stuck, and you're feeling like your cue sounds like some kind of musical identity crisis, and maybe you've listened to the same 8 bars 300 times, just ask yourself, where am I in the creative process? Do I need to gather more? Do I need to get some feedback? Am I trying to perfect something that isn't quite finished, or am I skipping over that final polish just because I'm ready to be done? Whatever it is, figure out the next step and take it. Because when you follow this process and you're trusting in the 4 C's, I think you're going to find that the work becomes a lot more manageable. And it's ultimately, you're building a process that's going to help keep you sane and help keep you moving in this industry. But what do you think? Have you ever used the 4 C's, even if you didn't call them the 4 C's? I'd love to hear from you. Please let me know in the comments below. I do read all those comments and would love to hear from you. So we're going to take a quick break, but when we return, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on Nightbeat Hustle, which is kind of a psychedelic rock cue written by 52 Cues member Fraser Macdermid. We'll be right back. Every week I talk about how this episode and the podcast and the community, the channel, would not be possible without the amazing support of our family, friends, and neighbors, subscribers of 52Qs, who do pay their actual real-life money to keep all of this going. And in addition to being thriving members of the community, as well as supporting me and Shannon and everything that we're doing here, they also receive extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, hundreds and hundreds of hours of video archives, weekly Q breakdowns, production music almanac, living ebook, and the opportunities to submit to real music libraries. Now, it's free to join 52Qs. You can just go to 52qs.com and sign up, be a member of the community. We would love to have you. It will always be free to join the community. But if you've been watching, or if maybe this is your first time, but if you're wondering, is there a way to kind of level up my production music skills in the industry, meeting like-minded, super friendly, very generous composers? Then why don't you think about subscribing? Memberships start at around $4 a month, and we would love to have you. Again, that's 52qs.com. All right, that was Nightbeat Hustle from Fraser Macdermid. Fraser, thank you so much for sending this along. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, this was written not specifically for a brief. This is from Fraser, but was just to kind of get a feel for kind of, you know, where they're at in terms of their quality, and if we're kind of ready to start pushing into the sync world. And so I liked several things about this cue. I think the melody, that's a cool melody. And you didn't necessarily call this psychedelic rock. Upon listening to this, that's kind of where I would put this, you know, because music supervisors and editors, they need a really clearly defined genre and placement usage. And so I feel like this kind of lean into that, and to be honest, could probably lean into it even more. And if you were going to do that, then I would change the title. The title Nightbeat Hustle doesn't really, I don't think it really informs what I'm about to listen to. It's a very kind of artistic type of a title, which is perfectly fine. But as I've said on the show before, the title needs to be the promise that the cue delivers on. And Nightbeat Hustle doesn't tell me anything about what I'm about to hear. But if it was something, I don't know, like mushrooms and moonbeams, or I don't know enough about the psychedelic era of rock. But if it was like tie-dye, yeah, something with tie-dyes, or trip, or psychedelia, or peace, love, and tie-dye, or something to that effect, I think could be pretty effective. I actually like the drum sounds here. I think we're doing pretty good. Once everything gets cooking, the drums kind of get lost in the mix, and things are getting really, really loud. Overall, we're pushing into the minus 6 and minus 7 and 6 and 7 lufts. That's really, really, really loud. As far as the guitar performances, I do feel like we need some love on the guitar mix itself, and I think we got to tighten some things down. I don't think the guitar is really, really locked in and quantized. We have kind of the rhythm guitar. Yeah, and it could be the bass. It just doesn't feel like everybody's all locked together. And I feel like the guitars themselves could use a little bit more love with the mix. It's really, really kind of dry, and there's just a lot all together. We have some strings, we got some organs, we have a couple of guitar layers. By the way, I would either really bring down or take out. We've got some effects. That almost sounds like a drill or a water sprinkler or something. Yeah, I'm not sure we need that. Yeah, so we've got a lot of guitar layers kind of on top of each other, and I'm having trouble kind of placing them on the stereo stage. It feels like they're all jumbled together, and I don't know if that means we need to do some doubling. We need to do some stereo widening so that they're not all kind of sticking together. Also, looking at the form, if I'm an editor kind of looking at this, I can't see much of the transients. It's hard to kind of see where the form and the structure is. We do have a little bit of layering, but if I were to hit that, well, I wrote the note about making sure that we have a little bit more demonstrable layering, but as I'm needle dropping throughout, I can hear it. And it might just be that the loudness is pushing this waveform dangerously close to toothpaste, or flat topping, which is what I call when it just slams into the limiter here. So we're pretty close to that. Yeah, I'm not sure about that section there. Yeah, we have that. I don't know about hard panning that organ either. Do watch out. Also, there are a couple of intonation things with the guitar. And I know we're dealing with some bending notes and that kind of thing. Yeah, just needs to be overall tighter. And one of the questions that I would have for you is what type of programming would you see this on? Because this feels more like something that I would like to listen to, but thinking about kind of a usage for it in a television show. And this goes out to anybody writing music and wondering, is this really is it sync appropriate or whatever? Think about not just the type of scene it could get used in, but the type of show. And I encourage you to go find examples of the type of music that you want to write and see if that is getting placed in a show. Now, it's not the only barometer for what is and can be successful in the sync music industry, but if you can find an example of a placement in the same genre vibe that you are interested in writing, then there's a good chance that there's a market for it. However, I think it's a little backwards, and Fraser, I'm not saying you're doing this, but it's a little bit backwards to kind of write something and then trying to find a home for it. It's kind of like what we were talking about in today's episode, that during the gathering phase, gathering not just your sounds and everything, but having like your emotional goal and having a mindset to this is the emotion I'm going for, this is the type of placement I am wanting to land, and this is where I am pointing my creative efforts into a specific target as opposed to this is what I want to write. Now let's kind of find it a home. And yes, we can kind of overlap those things. And I've talked about that on the podcast as well. The three spheres of what you love to do, what you're great at writing, and what they need. And we spend our entire careers kind of pushing those three elements together. But if we can find a show that uses these types of things, especially a show that isn't a custom score or a bespoke score where they hired a composer to underscore, because finding those types of placements in unscripted TV or in an application that uses production and library music, that can be the difference between finding success with your cues and getting placements, or never getting placements. And so that's a real challenge. And so Fraser, back to your cue. I think we've got some good ideas here. If this were mine, I would push it into kind of psychedelia, lean into that, in that kind of Grateful Dead, Doorsy, jam bandy kind of thing. Title it appropriately, maybe even borrow more from that genre and find whatever kind of tropes or isms show up in those things, then using those, incorporating them, because I feel like your melody leans towards that. I feel like your instrumentation kind of leans towards it and could find some love. Now before we go, let's talk about our ending here. And let's end on a button on a solid 1 chord. And if you do want to kind of lean up to that, maybe some swells, some risers, or cymbal swell or something, and maybe bring up the drums, have the drums hit on the downbeat and crash, and then boom, kind of a fill, and then also watch your audio tail. It's cut off. I can actually hear the ring out from the reverb or the effects. And then it's hard cut off. So we would want to fix that. So we've got a lot of good things going on with this, but at the end of the day, finding that lane that is going to be the best application for this type, I think, is a challenge we all are working through. So Fraser, thank you so much for sending that along. I really do appreciate it. And if you would like feedback on your own cues, we do have weekly feedback threads over in the community. Over in the 52 Cues community, where members can post their cues and share comments and support one another. And while you're there, you can also submit to have your cue featured here on the podcast. And if you're ready to level up your writing and you are finding yourself writing consistently, I do host live feedback sessions every single week, actually twice a week, over for our family subscribers. And we have weekly feedback meetings, Zoom meetings, where folks share their cues. But if you are looking for truly personalized feedback, head over to 52cues.com/coaching, and you can order up online lessons, Zoom lessons, one-on-one sessions, and video critiques. Again, you can learn a lot more by heading over to 52cues.com/coaching. So that's going to do it for me this week. You definitely want to tune in next week, where I'm going to be unpacking yet even more inconvenient truths about the sync music industry. Yes, it's not all sunshine and lollipops, and there are some things that we just really have to find a way to be okay with if we're wanting to succeed in this industry. So that's coming up next week, and I do hope you will join me for that. But until then, thank you. Thank you for spending part of your day here with me. I know you have a ton of options out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go. So the fact that you chose to spend part of your very, very precious day with me really does mean a lot. And if you want to help pay that forward, and if you got some value out of it, you can like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Believe it or not, it really does help folks find me. So that's going to do it for me this week. I hope you've had an amazing week, and I know that you're going to have an amazing next week. How do I know that? Because I trust and believe that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52 Cues podcast is copyright 2025 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community, submitting your cue for review, or becoming a member subscriber of 52 Cues, head over to 52cues.com.